WP-Get Web Dev Tutorials for all user levels. The goal of this tutorial is... Okay, so sorry it's been a while, been very busy on other projects, but just thought I'd get a quick tutorial out today. I've seen a few people talking about blending of text with backgrounds and trying to get a better contrast between your blacks and whites, etc. So I had a bit of a look into it this morning and found some really good stuff I wanted to share with you. So this tutorial is titled Text Overlay Blends with the Background. Probably going to come up with a better title than that, but what I want to do is actually blend text which overlaps a background image. And I don't want to use this CSS mix blend mode because it's really not effective enough in many cases. This is very similar to Photoshop with your layer blending, where you've got lightness, color, exclusion, a whole bunch of other modes in there which are now available in CSS, which can be effective in some cases, but that's not what I'm looking for here. So an example of what I'm looking for is this, where I've got a background image, I've got some text over the top of it, and you can see the text is actually blending, where when we've got dark, it becomes white, and when we've got light, it becomes black. And we can change the amount of this with this method. The CSS blend mode doesn't allow you to change much in how it blends. The method I'm going to show you here gives you some control over that, so you can get some really good effects. There are some caveats with this. The background image, because it's masked and part of the text, you can be careful with your padding and your spacing, otherwise your images will be out of alignment with each other. I will show you what I mean a little bit later. So we come back to the description here. I got the inspiration from this CSS Tricks URL here. So I was looking around, found a few ideas here, tried some things out, and this is what I've come up with. So let's head over to how we do this. I'm going to start with a blank page. I'm going to delete all the content on this page here. I'm nicely zoomed in here so you can see what I'm doing. And head back over to our tutorial. And our step one is to add the section to the header. So we're going to add a new section. We're going to set the content to full width and the gap to no gap. So let's just do that now. Add a single section. I'm going to set it to full width and a column gap to no gap. That's pretty much all we need to do for the section. Come back to our tutorial, and our second part is to add the HTML widget. So we're going to add that to the page. We're going to choose our background image that we want. So let's just do that first. So head back over here. So we're going to grab an HTML widget, drag that into the section there, and we're going to go into our advanced background. I'm going to choose a background image. I'll use the same one as my little demo there. So this car, insert that. Now in here, it also just recommends you can do whatever you like with this to set it to center, the size of cover. Let's just do that. Center, and a size of cover. All right. So the next thing we want to do is copy the HTML from below and paste it into the content. Head down to our HTML below. So all of my code here, if you just left click on it once, it'll copy the content to the clipboard. Head back over to our HTML widget here, go to our content and right click and paste that in there. So I've got a basic heading. We then want to go back to our instructions, which was to then grab the CSS below and paste that into advanced custom CSS. I've just got to say, to do this, you need to have Pro. If you don't have Pro, you can still do this, but you need to use class names and put it into your customizer or wherever else your theme allows you to put it. We want to select all of the CSS. I'm going to left click on that, which will automatically copy my code. Back to here in my advanced, I'm still on my HTML widget, custom CSS. I'm going to paste that CSS in there, and there we have it. So that's pretty much all we need to do to get that background. Now, I'm going to go through the code a little bit later as to how it works, but let's look at a little bit of customization first. I'm going to view this page, open that up in a new tab. I talked a bit before about this being customizable, so I'm going to bring up my Chrome DevTools so you can see what I mean by that. I'll use my selector and select my heading 1 widget, my heading 1 element, and you'll see all the CS here that's been applied. The one we want to look at is where are we? This here, the filter, invert. So we're telling it we want it to be inverted, so whatever's black make white, white make black. We want it to be grayscale, and we want it to have a contrast. I'm using variables first, which I'll show you about shortly. So I'm going to just replace this for now with an actual number so we can actually see. So if I make it a contrast of 1, see now we've got some grays in there, so it's not all black and white. We make it a 2, we get less gray, 3, 4, 5. As we step through this now, this is pretty much black and white. If you look at this eye over here, we've still got some grays in it. Let's say we make that 50. Now, all we've got is black and white. So the contrast is the amount of contrast we want for this. So we can, if I go back to a 3, for example, contrast of 3, it's not giving me enough. Maybe contrast of 2, contrast of 1, 1. I can see some grays in here now. This here is a little bit unsaturated, so it's disappearing into the background. You've got to play with these to find out what works for you. So maybe it's, contrast of 2 works for me here. So I've got a bit of grey, but it's still enough to separate it from the background. Make it maybe a 3, makes it a little bit darker, maybe a 4, a little bit less grey there. And this is really, really white, black and white, basically. There's not much grey in there at all. So this is the difference between using the mix blend mode and using these filters. You've got some control over how it blends these properties. So the other one is the grayscale, which is basically a true or false or 0 or a 1. By default, I've got this on a 1, which means it turns the image in the background that's masked into a grayscale. If I set that to 0, it's actually inverting the colors. So the contrast still applies. So if we have a contrast of 1, not very saturated, contrast of 2, 3, 4, right up to 50 again. And we've got some very, very red and yellow stuff there appearing in there. So just by changing whether it's grayscale or not, with a 0 or a 1, and the amount of contrast, we get a lot of control over how this looks. And just so you can see, as I change my responsive, you can see as these things move, they're definitely masking with the image. If I move that a little bit more, see it moved out again, see the black here is in line with that edge there. The black there is in line with the bottom of that and the top edge of that. So all these lines here, you can see the grill, that's the unmasked area there. And as it's masked through the image there or the text, you can see the line there. So they're definitely in sync with each other, even as you go into responsive. So it's a pretty cool way of doing this. There is some caveats on this, and I'll come back to that when I describe how this works. But that's pretty much the tutorial. That's how we've applied these rules that I learned from that CSS tricks. So I hope this is something that is going to be of value to you. The details for explanation on how everything works. Value to you. Okay, now let's get into the actual code. So coming back to our HTML widget. So what we are doing here is on the HTML widget in the advanced, we're setting the background here. And what that will do, we have a look at this, the background that we set on that HTML widget actually gets set on this widget container. So there it is there in the CSS on the right hand side here. So when you set the background image on this HTML widget, it is on its first child. So there's the widget. So the container that's under it is where it puts the first child. We then have our H1 under here. You can make that an H2, H3, a span, whatever you want to change it to. What we're doing with our CSS is we're telling it to, for the H1, we want it to inherit the background. So it's going to inherit the background from its parent container, which is the H1 inheriting from this Elementor widget container, which contains the image. So this H1 is going to inherit that background. We're then telling it to go back to here. We want to mask it by clipping it with a WebKit prefix, and without the WebKit prefix, we want to clip it using the text that's inside there. So that takes the background image, it clips it around the text, and then what we're doing is we're saying that we want the color of the text to be transparent, because what we want to see is what's being clipped by this clipping. And then we want to apply a filter to invert. So what was black become white, what was white become black. We want to make it either a grayscale or not a grayscale, and then we want to set the amount of contrast. That's pretty much how the CSS works. I've done as I always do, and I use these variables, and then in your CSS. So for example, down here, we've got 200 pixels for that. I could just as easily just type 200 pixels into there. By doing it this way, I can actually just change that here. So if I change that contrast there to 2 or 1, I can change that here, all my variables in the one place, and wherever I've used it throughout the rest of the CSS, it'll automatically update. So that's why I do that. So contrast, so the grayscale of 1 or 0, there we go. Whoops, I messed that up. So that's a 0. Padding, maybe that's too much padding for you. 100 pixels or 40 pixels. The CSS works really well by just putting the padding on the H1. So in this case there, it's a vertical padding of 70. If we made it say 250, 2500, 250, got more padding at the top and bottom. And all of this still lines up. So hopefully that makes sense. Hopefully that's something that you can use and get some good value out of. WP Get web dev tutorials for all user levels.